This is a reflection on the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians, not from the usual point of view, with or against, and looking into the politics of things, but I want to look behind it. And I want to start with a quote in Shakespeare said by Brutus when he was reflecting on Julius Caesar. He says that greatness, when it abuses power, it wants to take that power apart from consciousness. And later he says that people, when they have cheered someone to great powers, they will turn back and look down at the last step of people they have stepped on to get there and forget all about it. So what I want to talk about is not really the conflict itself or how it developed or what's going on or who's right or wrong. There is something deeper that we usually do not talk about in these issues, but some maybe have done. At least it's my focus, and that's what's going on in the values of each group of these two nations, and why are they psychologically driven to do what they do, and what is it that can go wrong by choosing the way they act. Those who have power has big responsibilities to act accordingly to that power, and those who lack the power has also responsibility according to what they don't have. And so I'm trying to look at this from another perspective altogether. The first one, as I said, was the greatness of power. If you pull away the consciousness out of it, like any kind of ethics or morals, and you accept to use that power in any way you see fit, you have already stepped over some boundaries in history and in life that will come back at you and will punish you and will make you regret, and it will be a plate on your record when you look back in history, but also in society. So it's very important for people with power at this time. Maybe we all think of the Israelis who have the most power to do what they want, and they get the big countries alongside them of doing it, and they have the money to spend on it, and that's why they have this big responsibility. They many times have gotten so far they don't even want to listen to it. At the same time, the Palestinians, well, I have lived with Palestinians and among them and tried to understand their case from the inside, and my heart has also been with some of their sufferings, but I can see they also have some traits of tyrannism and traits of exclusionism within themselves. I remember one guy came to me after I had held a preacher. I was a preacher in the mosques in my younger days, and I had spoken about the divisions and troubles in the Muslim community, how that contradicts the message of brotherhood. And then he came to me, a big bald man. I know his name, but I'm not going to mention it. And he came to me dragging another guy, smaller guy, with him. And after the people was like leaving the prayers, and he came to me and said, "Listen, what are you upset about? When we, in my younger days, came to help these people from that camp in Lebanon, they are both from two camps in Lebanon. The one was living in one camp for refugees, Palestinians, and the other was in another camp. And during the civil war, fights erupted, and they had people attacking these camps. And so they came to help them. He said, when we came to help these people in that other camp, some of them on the street said, 'Oh, there comes the strangers.' And he asked him, 'Isn't that true?' And that other guy said, that's true. That's what happened.' So they have also a mentality they have to look deeply into. And so these two balances is going to like feed the war and feed the conflict forever, because it's about psychology more and values more than it is what we see on the ground. Looking back at the Israeli side, well, they have been suffering. When I look at their history, and I have met with some Jewish people, and I have tried to look into documentaries and listen to their talks and their feelings on this issue, and read the whole Old Testament. And I can understand they are very attached to that historic land, and they are very, very keen on getting their historic greatness back. They have been working on that for a few thousand years, because they have been wondering among the nations and living at part time through history with the Arabs, then with the Andalusians in Spain. Then they have been moved to inner Europe, and some of them were in Arabia waiting for the Prophet, and others were in Africa waiting, and so they've always been waiting for the biggest savior, and they have always seen themselves as this chosen people that has the right before God to keep on going. And so finally, they amass enough money and power and get the strength to be able to topple governments and be able to affect the decisions of the big nations. And whether the big nations have used them or not, that's another discussion. That's politically. But I'm talking about how they in their identity, how they identify with their story. And so finally, they get to come to this land, and they find this very stubborn Arabic Palestinian people who is not gonna give them an inch, and who's not gonna make way for their for or space for them. And they start fighting them, and the Arabs starts fighting back, and they start like scaring them into move, and the Arabs start scaring them with their killings, and so it started from there. A very stubborn people against a very determined people. And where do you get finally in that? You get, of course, a whole century or more of fights and killing and blood, and people are relentless. They on both sides. You can say we will win. They believe the one God, and it's the same monotheistic God. It's the God behind everything. The Jews believe he's something else, and the Muslims, Palestinians, believe he's something else. And then you have the small Christian minority that we also should talk about. Maybe I will make a talk on them by visiting one of my friends who knows a lot about them. But these two groups, the Arabs and the Jews, well, they have been pushing for their cause and been very stubborn, and they know God is on their specific side, and so they cannot lose. And if you look at it now, well, you see now, right now, the Israelis have the power, and with power, with might, comes also great responsibilities. And they are fighting among themselves on that, and how far they should push. And they know that this could have dire consequences when the help falters from the big nations, and people will remember what they have been doing in history. At the same time, you see these Palestinians who are very stubborn in a way that maybe also can be in Arabic. They say blind stubbornness is the same as rejection of goodness. It's like when you keep pushing your head to a wall, and you know this wall is strong, you can maybe affect it, and maybe you can put it down. And that's what they want to do. They want to keep pushing and fighting back, and never giving up an inch until they win everything back. And they are so determined that the Israelis are started to get scared about that. They're not saying it to people. That's why they lash out more harsh than ever. And they have made Gaza as a big internal prison, and they have tried to push them out of the West Bank and trying to control everything around them, and the Arabs and the big nations, because they know, well, we couldn't beat these people to leave, and we couldn't beat them to submission, and to understand that this is our holy land. And that brings forward hatred. This is what I want to get at. I'm not talking about why the Jewish are doing this. They are doing it because they want to get back to the Holy Land where they believe they belong, and the promised land of Moses and the one God. And so after 2,000 years, they get this chance, and still they haven't got it. They haven't got the peace they wanted. And so the hatred and the frustration grows day by day. On the other side, the Palestinians, well, they are traumatized in big ways. And I don't know if we understand trauma correctly, but trauma can be many things. But these people are multiplex traumatized. Themselves, their kids, their grandkids, their mothers, grandmothers, everyone has a trauma or complex trauma. And sometimes it comes out among themselves when they are not fighting the enemy or sending someone to die. They are not the most psychologically healthy people to be amongst, and they know that, and they fight amongst themselves, and they have all kinds of issues of anger, distrust, frustrations, troublesome actions, and their kids and their grandkids have gotten used to one thing only: throw the stone and be ready to die for your cause and for your land. And this takes a lot of psychological energy. We know that it's not easy to say to a kid or to yourself, well, I'm gonna prepare myself for death. It needs something special. It's almost like going to the edge of psychopathy and sociopathy. And when you don't die and you stay, or maybe your brother die and you stay, your sister dies and you stay, or you're the sister to the brother who died, whatever, or the mother, it affects you deeply. And the hatred will grow in you as well. And then you will psychologically also be some kind of hard, cynical, unstable at some ways. Uh, at the same time, we can praise it as strength, and we can praise it on both sides. There are some really strong people who are willing to die for their cause and understand that God will give them and grant them the goodness. And I'm not laughing at these people at all. None of them. I know some people in the West like to laugh at the monotheists and say, oh yeah, they fight for their gods and they're just killing themselves. And this is an arrogant way of going about a very important and serious situation in the life in our times. So they are also proud people who goes to die believing deeply that the God has been on their side and he will give them something in return. This belief is deep in the Jewish, but I know it's also as deep or maybe deeper in the Arabs, in the Palestinians, and that's because of especially the Islamic what can you say, philosophy of the afterlife, and that has been used fully. And so you also find another psychological trait, and that is using the religious arguments to justify the means and the goals and the actions. And you find it on both sides. I wasn't aware of it before some years ago, that the Jews had the same, it was very strange, almost accurate the same way of argumenting as the Palestinians. But they just use the Torah and use their religious scriptures and their rabbis to do so. And so when you have the leader of the Israelis having talked to this big rabbi who told him, you will be the destiny of Israel, and he will show him the text and talk to him about how things will go, you know that this is a prophecy they want to fulfill and live by. And they're going to do it until the last man, and they will never falter. Even if they lose, they will get back. And if you look at the Palestinians and how the arguments came from, especially the Islamic literature about the promised land, and I have read a lot into those, both the fighting and the morals and the ethics of it, but also the prophecies. I have seen some and listened to some of the prophecies of the Jews, and I can relate to what they believe and fantasize about it. And the same with the Arabs and the Palestinians. They can see that a battle will come, and what they say, they fantasize about it and think about it. And so they are waiting also for the apocalypse, and they're waiting for God to finally step in and help one of the two sides. And then you have, of course, the Christian minority who's waiting for Christ and Jesus to come down and finally settle these two ungodly groups who have been fighting forever, and he will put the eternal peace on earth. And I'm not laughing at that either, because I know this is a deep, profound belief within the Christians. And you can find traits of it in the Muslim literature as well. And so everyone has these prophecies, and they look back in history and use it in reality. And so it's religious fights. It's also fights like some kings has been used to look at the stars, or let someone tell them their future, or look at some mythology. These are monotheistic, and that means they are looking to the one source they believe is from God, and God has spoken through, and they will keep sticking to that and fighting over it. One another thing I have also discovered by following this conflict in many years is the nature of corruption that's actually very deep and struck in both communities and both what can you say, both nations. You can from time to time get some news that comes out about some corruption in Israel, and with the Israeli prime minister or people or leaders or whatever, and how some people are opposing it and some Jews are protesting against it and they want a court of law and all that and all that. Uh, but all that should stay like within the limits of the chosen people. They don't want to be exposed to the world and to people who are not of their belief. So maybe they want to punish each other for the lack of righteousness and the misuse of power. But they don't want that to become a public scene, and they don't want to become internationally. And that's why they say every time somebody is trying to claim something from the Jewish people and the Israelis, they go and put up a court in their own home country so they can be reached by the international communities. And so they go about protecting even the corruption because they believe in the true cause they are in. Or maybe they try to attack that corruption, but keep it hidden. But it comes out from time to time. And the same happens in the Palestinians. Well, the corruption there, it's not only come out, it's been a disaster. So if you can talk about corruption on the Israeli side, you can find it in big measures on the Palestinian side as well, up through the 50s, 60s, and until now. And most of it came out when the big leader Arafat, he died, and people started recognizing how he was been using the money. And God knows what these new people and the others that has taken over now will be revealing when they go away or when they get exposed. And the same goes for those who are like more religious than nationalistic. They have hidden things and people are not aware of it and maybe don't ask and don't question, because right now we're not going to fight among us, even though it's corruption. We got to fight the enemy. So it doesn't matter, something like that. And that's a wrong psychology on both sides, because corruption is what eats a society from within, and the society who is able to clean the corruption quicker and better will stay the healthiest and will help itself on its feet some way or another. And so that kind of accepting corruption in the name of the fight and in the name of liberation and getting our country back or protecting our historic right, this is a wrong way, totally wrong way, that if you don't believe in God, at least you will see history and the nature of human sociological interactions show that this is a kind of a virus that can eat up the community from within, because this will spread. It won't stay within the few. It happened with the Roman Empire as we know it, and it happened in the Islamic, and it happened in many kingdoms. So the idea of corruption being okay or in a way, or protected and hidden because we are in a fight with the enemy, is a wrong way. And another psychological thing is the hatred. I've really found that the hatred has taken over. Maybe it all started like a journey to the promised land with big hopes. I remember some Danes telling me that they, in the 50s and 60s, went to the Palestinian and Jewish areas at that time. It was like divided, and they went mostly to the Jewish areas to help them build these common kibbutzes and cantons where they live together and farm and work and dance and sing and have great evenings under the sky of Jerusalem and the areas nearby. And they were very active in that. Some of the Europeans helping these poor Jewish people back to their rightful place. And when they and that was another time where maybe there have been a kind of hatred and dislike for the neighbors, the Arabs, but it wasn't as it is today. And the same with the Palestinians. I went back in history books. I've talked to old people, not in an organized way, but through my life and journey, I've just been sometimes curious, and I've met with old Palestinians, and I've read some stories about how they told about their grandparents and the first revolts and all that. Well, in many centuries, the Jews has been living among the Arabs. That's something people forget totally. And there are Arabic-speaking Jews who live and have work, and maybe they are not treated on the same basis as the Muslims. That goes for every non-believer community. They have a lower grade relatively, but they have basic rights and they can both work and be alive. And there have been periods where they have been persecuted or hit on or something like that, but it hasn't been the general rule. I know some people wanted to look like that, but it is not. If you look back at the Islamic history, you will see Jewish people thriving, and historians and scientists, doctors, are their names comes up in history books as with great influence on sultans and kings and in the courts and in the scholar society. So they have not been pushed away all the time as some people wanted to look like. And the same with the Christian communities. But so they have been living amongst the Arabs, and suddenly, and that was another time, there wasn't the same hatred. Okay, there was a dislike, like the other side. Oh, we don't like the Arabs, the sons of Ishmael, that guy who wasn't from the Ishak clan. And so he's lower and he was pushed away and all that they believe. And the same with the Arabs. Oh, these are the Jews. These are the people who betrayed God's word and God's promises. And there is and has always been in the religion between these two groups some kind of contempt and this disliking. But the hatred that had grown over the years because of the blood and because of the force and because of fighting back and all that has become bitter and has become deep, has become problematic, and you can almost feel it's like both parties are fighting more out of revenge and hatred than the original goal of putting things right as they think. And I don't believe hatred leads to anything good. It leads to more bloodbath and blindness and the wrong way of going about. And that's the warnings in all religions, and especially the monotheistic ones, that don't let hatred lead you, because then you have to dig two graves, one for the one you hate and one for yourself. And so it will be an unending story. And this is the psychological side of what I see in the Palestinian conflict, the hatred that has taken over. So you hate the Arab just because he is an Arab. You don't like the Palestinian because he's just a Palestinian, just because he's a Palestinian. And the other side, they hate the Jew just because he is a Jew. What is that? That has never been okay in the Islamic literature and the Islam sources. I have read really many of them, and I've really understood a lot of these things. There hasn't been a hatred for the Jew as a Jew. They have been treated as a minority, but now there is this hatred, and the hatred for an Israeli just because he belonged to Israel. And so that goes for the kids and women and children and people visiting and everything. Well, that's a blind hatred. So when you jump over the fence and believe you're fighting a free fight, and you kill a few thousand and kidnap another hundreds, that is not an act I believe God or the law or the Muslim way will accept. This is beyond the edge. This is wrong, and this is not a way to fight your fight. But it's the hatred that has taken over, and that hatred had spread also amongst these people. So you see, they are not only hating each other, but they are hating themselves among themselves. We see it sometimes in the Israeli communities when news comes out and people talk about how they're bitterly fighting over some stuff. Okay, they say they can agree later. The same says the Palestinians. Well, yeah, we are brothers, but like brothers, every family we fight amongst ourselves. And yeah, maybe, but I can see at least that it's more than that. There is a profound hatred for among themselves as well, because they don't belong to the same group or same way of thinking or same religious background and so on. And so the hatred has become a big psychological issue in that fight, and that makes it impossible to solve, even though you want to solve it, because it becomes very personal and it becomes very determined on getting revenge because of the blood that had been spilled. And so it's not easy to get over it and forget unless you change something psychologically in yourself. Both sides can change psychologically within themselves. And one of the psychological traits I've also seen is the what can you say, the psychology of being lost. And how to explain that? Well, on both sides, there have been people who seem lost in this fight, even though they belong to Jewish people or to the Palestinian people. And they are lost because they do not tap in the same way of dealing with things as these fighting parties are doing. At the same time, well, they are bound to their community and clan and people. They can't get out of it, and they don't want to get out of it. It's too dangerous. It's like suicide. If you step out and say, well, I don't like your ways, and I don't like how you go about doing things, and that way you are solving our situation is not good, and so on. So these people become a minority that's conflicted because they don't like the things, but they cannot step out of it because they are Palestinians, they are Arab, they are part of the community, and the same with the Jewish. They cannot step out of it. We are Jewish. We have to stick together. I cannot do anything else, but I don't like it. Occasionally, some voices comes out, like big writers or journalists or people who just want to speak out on what they don't like in their own community and how they were like disillusioned by what they thought it was and what it is in reality, and how the hatred has taken over and the way of doing things has been in arrogance and in a bad way. And we hear some Jewish voices speaking about that from time to time, and they think that that would be the way to destruction for their own people, because that's why God and Yahweh has always destroyed the Israeli might. It was because of the arrogance that takes over, and they speak out about that. And at the same time, we see some Palestinian voices doing the same, coming out and saying, well, my people is totally lost. And so they are the lost ones because they have really no place to go and they have really no voice. And if they dare come out with their voice, they will be isolated, maybe persecuted, at least have hard times. That's many psychological traits I can see in the story that we don't usually talk about. Many talk just about the political level and the economical level and the sociological level and why they're fighting again and so and so. But there are some very deep psychological mechanism, and according to C.G. Jung, it is where we have to start, and it is where we have to deal with things. This is on the level of psychology, because it is where the deep problems are buried, and it's where they are rooted. It's in the individual and in the group and in the psychology that they are building on. And I can also mention one other psychological trait on these on behalf of what I see in these two people, and that's the psychology of the promise. They have both been looking into the holy text and seen the promise, and they want to live it and they want to fight for it. And so some people would say, yeah, these books have been destroying people and God's ways are bad and they are the reason for fights, and leave them and go and live your lives as atheists or whatever. Well, that's another discussion. Let these people just go back to their beers in the bars and sit there and sip to that third or fourth or fifth beer and knock their brains out. That would be much more joyful. But that's another talk altogether, how these people just put things out like that. Oh, let them leave their books and leave their religion and background, as this is something people do. That's not how the world is. The world is exactly that. It is promises, it's cultures, it's beliefs, more than it is just socio-economical structures. It's something deeper in the values. That is the hidden part of the iceberg that many people do not look at. And so that deep belief we have within the Jewish and within the Palestinian Arabic Muslim community is very deep, and you have it also rooted in the Arabic Palestinians, but because they are a minority, maybe their voice does not come out in the same way. So both the Jews and the Arabs, Palestinians, have this promise of God helping them to win. And the promise is very, very specific on this, on the Holy Land and about it. And you just have to tap into YouTube and just write something about the promise of the Holy Land, a Jew, and you will listen to a big lecture or maybe many lectures of some very knowledgeable Jewish scholars speaking about it and digging into the Torah and digging into the scriptures around it to and the explanations to tell you why they believe. And you have to do the same with some Arabic scholar or some Arabic who have Islamic knowledge, and you can go in and see all the sources of the Muslims on why they believe they will be the winning part, and they keep hoping and holding on to that hope, and that's very understandable. I can say that as a spiritual and religious person, that that's what we do in life. What else do we have? We have to keep to that promise of God. But what if we are reading these things wrongly? And what if we are basing politics on a wrong assumption on these explanations? Because most of the time they are not so detailed. Many times they are vague, and they give you just a hint, or they tell you about the promised fight where you will win over the others, and you will be in this and that part, and things will happen before that. That will be 1, 2, 3, and you see it happening. You say, yeah, that's the time. We're getting close. The apocalypse is near. We're gonna win. God will come to earth and all that, or will send us the light of the angels. And I believe it's true. It will happen. But it's not sure that they are reading it politically correct, and it's not. Maybe how can we be sure that this is the end of times? This is not exactly the way it's explained in these texts. It's the promise of the fight and the win, but the interpretation of it politically has also fueled the fight among these two groups. So what to do about that? It's maybe to loosen up a bit and understand that maybe that's what God really promised, and maybe we are not doing what God wanted us to do in order to fulfill his promise. Well, has anybody been looking at that? It's easy just to go about, say, well, I have the power, and that's the might, and that's given to me by God. I can use it, and I will win, and I will keep winning. And the other side will say the same. And so one another psychological trait is about the righteousness. They both believe in righteousness. And that's very deep and profound in both cultures. To be righteous and to treat even your enemy well, and to treat people who fall under your rule in a good way. That is the most profound message of God in both religions, that you have to be righteous. God loved the righteous, and he wants people to reflect that in life. And he told the Jewish, you have to treat the foreigners and your guests in a good way, because remember, you once were strangers as well, and were guests and were driven about. And the same goes to the Palestinian party. They listen every Friday from the prayers and the mosques that God orders righteousness and goodness. And so this is also a very important psychological trait in both nations. They both believe in righteousness. And that could maybe help an understanding if we go on the psychological level and depth, because righteousness will be leading these two groups to adhere, because they look back at the religious text and God and the scholars, and they say, we have to be righteous. And righteousness has to be redefined, truly, to be upheld as the most important pillar of the law and the way they go about. And if they both do that, they will treat each other in a different manner, because they will have to answer to God himself if they do not treat each other righteous. And if they go surpassing that, they know God is looking, and they know that the punishment will hit and they will lose. And many times in the Muslim literature, we have explanations of why Muslims have been losing battles or maybe grounds, and they say, well, we became a tyrannical and not righteous people. And I've heard it from the Jewish rabbis speaking online. They say also the same things, that well, we have been where we have been because we haven't been righteous, we have been good enough, we haven't cleared our hearts to God so that he can give us what we need back, but now he has. And so they also are worried and looking around, how are we dealing with this, and are we doing it well? And there are rabbis who look deep in the Torah text and are mystics, or maybe just Orthodox scholars, and they do not like overstepping the boundaries of might and power, and they always want to be as righteous as they can, even to their enemy and opponents. And so this is also a psychological trait that we have, the adherence to righteousness in the two groups. And I just remembered there was a British journalist who went around in the Middle East. I can't remember his name, Simon Russell, Kurt Russell, something like that. It's not the actor I'm speaking about. It's a young man. Um, in my opinion, he was just trying to understand the Arabic culture, and he went around speaking to people and came to the Israeli-Palestinian area, and then he met with a Palestinian there. And that guy was working on, he had a small shop of souvenirs for the tourists and the people who came there. And he had some hand-worked bronze and different symbols. And this British journalist was very surprised to find that he had both Islamic, the half moon with the star, and God's name, and Islamic symbols in carved in to some jewelry, or just carved as a bronze piece. And he had Christian symbols like the cross and the fish and these kind of Christian reflections of God and the symbols. And then he had the Jewish ones, the star, David's star, and he had the menorah, and he was surprised. What is this? And are you what, are you not Palestinian? Yes, yes. And he could see, he went inside to pray on his prayer mat, and I say, well, you're Palestinian, you're even praying, and why are you selling all this? He says, well, this is, many people need different things, they believe in different issues. And he said, what do you say about, now you're a Palestinian living here in Jerusalem and it's under the control of the Jewish people, is that okay with you? And he said, well, that was the promise God gave them in the Holy Book, and who can oppose God's will? And that there was a moment of silence. Even I was really taken by that moment, because I think many would have been if they have seen the program, because that was just another way of looking at it. And that's what I'm trying in this kind of talk to say, well, that's another way looking at it totally, saying that God has promised this and it will happen sooner or later, and now is the time where it's going to happen. So all this these people are doing will be effortless and helpless. So looking at the psychological traits are important, and they are maybe the things that can define the conflict and the situation. And that's why I hope both people will look deeply into their psychological traits. They have negative pictures of each other. That's also something one has to mention, that if you look in the Jewish literature, Arabs are not really being put on high pedestals and they are not being treated as equals. And that always makes me scared, and sometimes I get irritated by that, because when I get to talk to some Jewish friends, and maybe I want to become friend with the Jews, and I think they are an okay people, I get this thought, oh yeah, they have this look upon Arabs as people who are lower and not good enough. It's like almost we have a kind of a Nazi thought in there, that the Aryan race is the best one, and so here it's the Jewish race that's the best one, and the others are not good enough. And I get scared and get irritated. I said, oh my God, I hope this guy doesn't hold this view, or maybe just hiding it. But I found that many of them don't hold this view. They have it in their literature, but they don't look at you like that. And I know some Arabs, also Palestinians, who have Jewish friends who say the same. So it's not only me. On the other side, the picture of the Jews in the Palestinian literature, especially of course, tapping into the Arabic and Muslim literature, is also mostly negative. Especially in the Quran, there are a lot of criticism of how they did not adhere to God's message, and how they go about cheating and treating people and all that. So there is a more negative picture of each other, and that's what leads to dehumanization. You need to demonize, to dehumanize. And so that makes it easy. And that's why both people can get very surprised when they meet each other in circumstances where this picture does not uphold, like in music, concerts, if they're working together on something like that, or some religious travel where they're gonna talk and discuss, or where they are just stuck in the same situation. And that changes a lot, people meeting each other And sometimes it doesn't change a thing because both have this negative view, but people who get through that, they will be able to see the other side of it. So the negative picture in both camps is also very, very deep. The look on the Palestinians as those hard, harsh people from history who were expelled from that area and had taken it over for some time, and then came I guess it was the Babylonians, or was it the Sumerians? They came and expelled these Palestinians and talked about them in history books. The Paleo people, they were some kind of very harsh and rough people, suppressors in many ways. So they weren't really liked in history, and so the Jews don't like them. And they have also negative pictures of, as I said, the Arab and Ishmael and the history of his clan. And so it doesn't go and fit well with the Jewish people who are like God's chosen kids and above everything and anyone else. So these Arabs should not try to put themselves above the Jews or maybe get this big empire as they had for 1,000 years. That must also have been a psychological shock for the Jewish communities in those centuries to go. And so finally now they can put the Arabs down and control them all the way over and maybe keep it that way. And the same goes for the Palestinians. They will look at the history books and the Quran, and they will look at the scriptures and how the Jews has been in history, and they will also have this picture of them as people who should die and should be killed and who are on the level of pigs and apes. And so this is also a deep negative picture they have upheld. And if you discuss that, they say, well, the Holy Scripture says, and God has spoken. And so they both believe God has spoken in each way. And I know some people now will say, oh, those people and their God, leave them out of your life and go on living. And this God of those has destructed the world. And some people have this notion and they stick to it and they just shake their head and cannot understand any of this. Neither can I all the time, but I'm talking out of respect for that God as a monotheist and out of trying to understand why it is like this. And so this is the reality of their psychological struggles. And then I have to mention something very important, and maybe I'll get back to it in other talks. It's how they treat themselves and each other. The way they look at themselves and each other is also very, very important for how they look on the other people. So having a kind of arrogance in you, or having a kind of feeling inferiority complex, as they say, feeling below others all the time, can give you some psychological trouble because you want to compensate. You're not in balance. The balance is that you feel yourself equal to others. Sometimes you are better, sometimes you are lower and worse. And so you get on life in that kind of balance. But if both people have been living this inferiority, they've always been suppressed, pushed to the edge. Now the Palestinians are suppressed and pushed to the edge, and that gives a kind of need to compensate inside, and so they go about trying like to react with greater harshness and arrogance than they maybe would have if they had the more normal equilibrium. That's why when you see Palestinians coming from abroad, from places where they have found this equilibrium, they do not recognize themselves among their people in the Palestinian lands and areas where they have camps. They feel they are a bit strangers. They're not thinking the same way anymore and not sharing the same feelings all the way. And the same goes for the Jews who've been living in the West or been living apart from this conflict. And they see how the people are going about and what fills their life and hearts and minds. They can also have difficult relating to all that. So it's happening on both sides, but maybe they're not seeing it and they're not seeing each other, definitely, and they're not looking into it. But some are. There are always some meetings, and there have been groups from both sides trying to always meet across the borders of the fight and establish some kind of music schools, some kind of religious dialogue, some kind of literature meetings, travels together, And many times, some of the Christian Palestinians have had a hand to do in this because they try to bring them closer or better together. And so we have these psychological issues. They struggle with that. This has been a long talk, but I, for a long time, wanted to say something about this, and I didn't know where to put it. So now I'm putting it out there. Hopefully, it will gain some inspiration for someone who has the power to deal with these things, at least maybe just broaden the horizons of both groups, that they are stuck in some kind of psychological way of looking at things that will just make the holes deeper and the struggle worse. And they are both stubborn, and that's also a psychological trait they cannot underestimate. They are deeply stubborn, and if they think they can beat each other to submission, they are totally wrong. The Israelis, not all the Jewish, but the Israelis have been trying for 100 years now, and it fails all over. And the Palestinians come back at them with two tries the power they left with. And the Palestinians, if they think they just can make the Israelis scared, well, they are empowering their will to stay and to go fighting harder and to use more might and to crush even more than they have been wanting to do before. And so, yeah, what's the end of this? It's not easy to see. Um, but I think the beginning of the end and the change is psychological more than it is both political and social.